Hello again and welcome back to the podcast, libertarianism.uk podcast with me, Andy Duncan, which is Andy009 Duncan for Twitter. Tonight we're talking about the Great Reset and the War on Liberty. And we've got the fabulous, the amazing, the brilliant Greg Moffitt. Now he's in God's own county of Yorkshire, where all the best men are born and well, they live sometimes, but they are born there. So he's got very much an English perspective on this. Now this is a huge topic, so we may need to go to 2 podcasts on this. But let's see how we get on in this one. I've got 3 main sections. The first section, we're going to talk about 4 things that could be coming up soon that the globalists, well, globalist is my shorthand for fascist, communist, parasitic, elitist types. Okay, so I think you know who we're talking about, but I'm going to call them globalists. 4 things that they might be pushing very, very soon. So we'll talk about those in the first section. In the second section, we're going to get on with talking about the book by Darth Schwab, The Great Reset. So we're going to talk about that book. And in that, we'll be bringing in eating bugs. For anyone who loves talking about eating bugs, all the other things, the 15-minute cities and all those other things which are more in the background but are coming out more and more. So that's part 2. And then in part 3, we're going to cover how we can, as believers in liberty and freedom, how we can fight back, how we can stop this monster in its tracks. It seems inexorable, but maybe it isn't inexorable. Maybe we can stop it, and then maybe we can shrink it back into Pandora's box at a later time. Oh, Greg does have his own podcast, by the way. That's Legalize Freedom. And I'll put a link to that podcast in the show notes for later on. So let's just bring up Greg. There he is. You can see him there in Yorkshire, God's own county. Hello, Greg.
Hi, Andy. Very nice to be with you on your podcast, your latest venture.
Yeah, it's been a while, hasn't it, since we last spoke together? A few years. But I'm only 27, so you must be 23, so it can't have been that long ago. Okay, let's get on then with the first of these 4 things. So there's 4 things the globalists are trying to push. Now, because I'm into Austrian economics, I thought my most interesting one for me was digital currency. So the question I'm going to ask you is, why, given that we basically hardly use cash anyway these days, we use plastic and Apple Pay and Google Pay and all those other things, we hardly use physical cash anymore. But why are they trying to push digital currency so hard? A completely cashless society.
Well, the problems with a cashless society in respect of liberty, I think most of your listeners, viewers are probably familiar with to some extent. But I think the proposed system of central bank digital currencies is kind of like, if anybody knows anything about cryptocurrencies, it's beyond our system of just using, a bank card to pay for everything, a credit card or a debit card, because you're still drawing on money that even if you never see it physically in cash, let's say it's your money that you're in job or investments, whatever, it's paid into your account or accounts. You can go and see it there. You might still get a paper statement. It shows that it's there. You use your cards. You spend the money down. More comes in and out. So, and that's fine. And obviously, there's a record of it there, of every transaction that you've made. But even your bank, well, officially anyway, even your bank can't just go probing into that without your permission. And certainly no one in a dark suit can just walk into the bank and demand to see what you've been spending your money on. It requires a cause. For example, say for the police to be able to get access to your bank records of suspected criminality. But for most people, all these little transactions in and out, they just chug away, and no one's really keeping an eye on that. The problem with the central bank digital currency model that they're proposing is that it really goes way beyond that. It's proposing to make there's things like currency expiration, so that the money would expire. You get money paid at the end of the month. We're not talking here about perhaps freewheeling investors who've got fingers in many pies and all sorts of assets held in many different forms and in many different territories and subject to many different taxes. We're talking about the average person here. The implications for the person who maybe isn't so well informed, because maybe they've never needed to be. Most people never have enough money to really get informed about money or about investments. But people never have anything that constitutes a real investment. So, but for the average person, if you look at any of these proposed systems that are being trialed now, including in the UK and various countries around the world, the idea is that the central bank would issue the currency. Well, they already do, but if it's purely digital, then it's, as I say, it has an expiration date. And also, it could then, the potential exists there. And initially, this was the stuff of like conspiracy theorists, but this is part of some of the proposed systems. What you could spend the money on could be controlled. And a lot of it stems from climate objectives, net zero sort of economies and what have you. So therefore, if you were wanting to, or trying to spend any of your digital currency on, a petrol or diesel car, well, that just wouldn't be possible. And the potential for control and manipulation of people's lifestyles and activities is enormous. And if you couple restrictions on what you can spend your money on with the idea that perhaps at the end of the month, let's just say for a wage slave, that any money that you don't spend, you lose, then what happens to the idea of saving an investment? So if you've got this limited range of things you can spend it on and you can't keep it beyond the end of the month, then you literally start to become like a slave, don't you, on a plantation? You've got you can't, slaves couldn't keep the food they were given. They couldn't store up. There was no excess. There was no surplus, no incentive to do anything like that for yourself. So if you're comparing the system that we started talking about, just how most of us operate these days with little plastic cards, it still has a feeling of like, this is cash in my pocket, but it just happens to be in the form of this plastic card. But you know that any time you can go to a hole in the wall, pretty much anywhere in the world, subject to fees, and you can get some currency out locally, paper money, and what you spend that on won't show up on the record. It doesn't mean you're suggesting that anybody's engaging in activity that they shouldn't, whatever that is, but it's private.
Yeah. The hookers and the cocaine model is with cash, not on your plastic card.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, the hookers and cocaine model is what's always invoked as like, why we should have a cashless society. Because then they do this all the time, don't they? It's like, because criminals, they do this with gun laws. Oh, well, if we ban people having guns, then suddenly all these criminals won't be able to be armed. But as we know, criminals, especially, professionals, dedicated criminals, whatever, people who for that way of life, they have their systems, they have their way around it. And that's why armed robbers, gangsters, whatever, that's why they're able to be armed in countries. But for example, here in the UK, where almost no one can hold a legal firearm, they find ways around it. So if we went to a cashless society, don't think for a second that anybody who wanted to move money around, let's say nothing about what the globalists might be doing with their own, assets, their own cocaine and hookers and firearms. Criminals will find ways around it. And because there's an overlap, like a Venn diagram type overlap between the ways that people who are outside the law as it's written and those of us who just want to be able to make our own choices, there's an overlap there. That's how the whole thing gets, blackened, tarred with the same brush, as it were.
So we're going to have this Keynesian idea of aggregate spending can be kept up because you have to spend your money. There's no savings. You're then beholden to the state because you've got no savings, so you have to go back to the state with your begging bowl out saying, please help me. And also, as we saw with Justin Trudeau and the truckers in Canada, first thing he did was use terrorist powers to cut off the bank accounts of the truckers to shut down the protests. So we'll just see that writ large. Okay, so let's move on to the second thing there, which also, again, I think ties us into the state, and that's the universal basic income. Now, we've seen this a lot being discussed. And why do they want to do this? Why do they want to introduce a universal basic income?
Well, again, I think it's partly sort of a reactionary and partly kind of a proactive plan. You read books like The Fourth Industrial Revolution, which again is another World Economic Forum, which we haven't actually mentioned yet, World Economic Forum publication. The increasing mechanization of society, computerization, application of technology to almost every aspect of our daily lives in industrialized, societies, but increasingly others as well, has meant that, the number of people employed in, jobs that you and I, our fathers might have done, for example, they've been going away for ages. Now, this is not news to anyone because long before factory jobs it became, not really a thing anymore in the US or the UK or mainland Europe. They were being shipped out to, outsourced to, when I was growing up, certainly turn any object over and made in Taiwan was on the bottom, which if that's, proxy for China, really. So, and in the last few years, it's been, for a long time actually, made in China. So those jobs have been shipped out anyway. But if the technocratic globalist model continues down, the path that it is, there'll be even more people, or even more human beings for whom there is no meaningful work of any sort. So rather than having a negative spin, I guess, of like having increasing numbers of unemployed on the dole, state handouts, this universal basic income idea is that there would be a guaranteed, basic income, that does what it says on the tin, for everybody, actually in some proposed models, no matter what their existing wealth might be. So that's just, it's $1,500, £1,500, €1,500. Everybody gets that every month, whatever. And the idea is it puts a floor under your finances so you can afford the rent, you can afford to eat, you can afford the heat, and so no one's on the street. The problem with that, of course, we already see with state handouts and state benefits is that you can be made to jump through any number of hoops in order to receive that money. Again, it's just it's another form of dependence on the state.
Yeah, one of the reasons I object to it is that they take my money off me to give to someone else, or they print money to devalue what money I have, so that then they can give that money to someone, so they can give that money to somebody else with this counterfeiting of inflation. So I object it on those grounds. But the other thing is the dependency trap, isn't it? Because people will become dependent on this, and then they'll say, if you don't do this green thing, or you don't get this vaccine or whatever, then we're going to cut your universal basic income down to zero. They did this in the Soviet Union because everyone had to work for the state. And sometimes the state would sack people, and then people really struggle to survive because there's nowhere to go if the state won't employ you. So people would pick up coppers and bits of metal off the streets, or their friends would look after them because there was loads of money, because the money wasn't really worth very much. So people would just let it all fall on the floor. This stopped, by the way, when the Berlin Wall came down. When Russian money became worth something, that all stopped. People stopped dropping money on the ground. So we've seen this thing in the Soviet Union before. People are totally dependent on the state, and the state can just cut you off when it's had enough of you. Now, mentioning their vaccines, this is the third of your four things. Now, I've already felt this personally, and a lot of us have already seen this. And we've got evil creatures like the slimeball Tony Blair at the recent Davos meeting pushing this again about how we should have vaccine passports. Now, do you think they're going to get away with this? We've seen a third of Americans haven't had vaccines, and there's some pushback on the hundreds of thousands of people who are suspected of unexpectedly and dying for no particular reason. Are they going to be able to get away with this pushing of the vaccine passports?
Well, in short, I don't think so. It depends what we mean by getting away with. I mean, over my dead body, literally, is my point of view on that. And I don't think that particular agenda is, from their perspective, in a stronger position as given what's happened in the last 2 to 3 years, if you see what I mean. even at the most mundane level, many mainstream media commentators said, the kind of hysteria about pushing this, medical treatment and making it a condition of having a life is in danger of undermining trust in medicine in general. And I think that's what's happened. And there has been some genuinely, even that I would agree, negative, fallout from this. People saying, "Oh, I'm not going near a doctor for this, that, the other thing." And I would say, well, maybe you should. But, so it was inevitable that if there's a form of crying wolf, I suppose, that they would just push this and push this and push this and go too far. I don't really know where we're up to. I get the feeling there'll be a lot more pushback if they went all out, as they did, in 2020. But it really, I think, would remain to be seen. I think we'd have to, let's hope it never comes to that, but I think we'd have to see a campaign on that sort of level again to really see, sort the men out from the boys and, see who's who. Pardon the pun, I just realised what I've said. Who's who?
Oh dear, that is bad. Sorry, I just got it myself. I think they'll try it with international travels, as they'll make up some other coronavirus. They won't. They'll give the next vaccine legal immunities forever as well, like the current one. And then if you don't take the vaccine, you won't be able to leave your country. So I don't think they'll try and make it compulsory, like the Americans tried to do. They tried to make everyone in the army and everyone in the health service take this vaccine. I don't think they'll go down that road again. They'll just make your life unbearable, especially for traveling, if you don't go with it. Which brings me on to your fourth thing, and this is the social credit system. So we've seen in China, a communist country. Now, I was brought up, we were supposed to hate communists. The reason I was brought up in Germany and British Army bases, and the reason West Germany, the reason we were there was to stop communism rolling in from Russia, from the Soviet Union. Yet now, with communist China, with the social control system, we're seeing Western governments, these totalitarians in Western governments, proposing the same thing. What are your thoughts on a social credit system, and will they try to bring that in too, this totalitarian communist thing?
Well, I think that, first of all, we have it, if not full blown, then certainly very well developed in China already. And but again, as I said to you in our email exchanges prior to this, the Great Reset is really a great rehash. I mean, to those of us who study these things, these ideas, their implementation devices may be, new and shiny, but intellectually, philosophically, they're ancient. It's just about power and control and manipulation. So we see that in China now in place, and these are intimately tied to the ideas of a digital currency and universal basic income. Those two and social credit, they're all three kind of planks of the same proposed system, because the social credit thing could see you getting rewards, maybe financial in terms of numbers on a screen for good behavior, more likely deductions, for inappropriate behavior, inappropriate spending, and what have you. And this can, of course, apply to not just your own behavior, but the sky's the limit, really. People you associate with, the behavior of your family and friends. You might have to become, part of your own, nudge unit. If your wife is spending money on the wrong things, her digital handout, you'd be under pressure to say, hey, love, maybe not. And same with your extended social circle, people that you associate with politically, intellectually, anything whatsoever, even places that you might go. And then you extend that into the digital realm where so much of our daily lives take place now, or at least are trackable and traceable now. The media you watch, that sort of movie that you were watching, with that sort of libertarian theme. Not sure about that, if indeed that was available.
Or watching this podcast on YouTube, bad. No holidays for you this year. No soup for you.
Yeah, exactly. No grill, no thin grill. I've said, C19. I've used the B word, the backs. All of these terms that people have started to develop a coded language for, I've used them all across my channel when I started making videos about these issues in 2020, and so far I've had no problems whatsoever. If you get a strike and this little chat disappears just because we've used either of the V words, then I wouldn't be surprised. I hope not.
Yeah, it's terrible, isn't it? I'm a great believer in Doug Casey's The Singularity, where all this technology makes the world better for everybody. But they just seem to be using AI to trawl through text and to trawl through audio, looking for keywords, and then banning people from using these keywords and so on. Now that's your 4 things covered. Your 4 things that you think that they're going to bring in as soon as they can. Now all of this is coming from our friend Klaus Schwab in Davos and the WEF, the World Economic Forum. And he wrote a book, The Great Reset, that people like Tony Blair are taking their marching notes from. Oh my goodness. There it is. Who's that? Thierry Malleret as well. I don't know who Thierry Malleret is. Now, you've read the book and you've reviewed the book. Now, we're going to talk about the 3 great areas in there, which is the economy, energy, and the environment. We'll cover that later on. But before we talk about those 3 areas, why are they doing this? What is... Now, we know it's global control and to create a new ruling class and so on. But what's their stated aim? What do they say to themselves that they're doing this for? Why do they want to have a great reset?
Well, the reasons are many and varied, and there's common themes that come up. What they say in the book is actually, the book is so dull and so badly written. It's really, and honest to God, you just find yourself, you start reading it and then you wake up half an hour later with your face pressed into the page, So from that point of view, it really is just dreadful, just graced, washed out, hyperbole. But my personal take, what I've said to myself and others at the end of looking at this book and their ideas in general, and again, the World Economic Forum is decades old. And before that, you had the Club of Rome, for example, and you go right back to the early 20th century and, Fabians and what have you. These ideas are not new. But it seems to be a sort of farrago of concerns about, and who wouldn't be concerned about the direction of travel of the human species at this stage, but it seems to be about all sorts of things to do with energy and economy and environment, and the systems that we have built throughout the industrial age, but particularly in the 20th century, and that those are starting to crack under the strain, particularly energy, and that they're, with fossil fuels, whatever you think about the future fossil fuels or fossil fuel supply, that there's certainly a perception amongst many people that we're already into problems with this, and is there enough to sustain the Western industrial style civilization that we have? And if there isn't, do we go to some kind of Mad Max style collapse, or do we try a technocratic way of managing what ultimately is a decline, but steering it in a direction that allows us to maintain control? And if that sounds kind of a form of benevolence on the part of these people, I think it's more to do actually with maintaining their own position more than anything else, because there's nothing like hard times to, it's a great equalizer. You see what I mean? Yeah. And a lot of the people in the ruling bureaucracies, the globalist cliques, would be absolutely useless in a crisis.
Well, they're useless now. Never mind in a crisis.
Yeah, but an actual kinetic crisis of what the hell are we going to do? Like, you're in a lifeboat in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and your ship's just gone down, or you're on a mountaintop and you've got no food and water left, and any type of actual physical, emergency situation, they would be quite useless in. So they want to maintain. This is why the rhetoric is always them. We all have to cut back. We have to have our 15-minute smart cities, and we have to do this, that, and the other thing, and eat easy bugs, blah blah blah. But we don't see them doing that.
No.
And this best summed up, I think, in you've seen probably the airstrips near Davos with all the private jets,
Yeah.
flying all these people in to have their little powwow. But meanwhile, you and I, if we want to fly to Alicante for a week, well, don't know about that.
Yeah. Fortunately, I already live near Alicante, so I'm okay. But there's two great books that greatly affected my kind of childhood or young teenage years, and that was 1984 and Brave New World. Now, I don't think they're going to go down the 1984 road. They've tried that. They've tried it in the Soviet Union. They've tried it in Nazi Germany. National Socialist Germany. They're trying it now in North Korea and places, and it's failed. And it will just always fail. I think they're now going down the Brave New World road, the matrix. You're happy inside the matrix. The technocratic, as you just said, the technocratic dictatorship. And the Great Reset, to me, when reading it, it just seemed to be describing Brave New World. You will be happy, you will own nothing. And I think they think that they're the alphas, don't they? So they're the alphas. They need the jets. Just like in Brave New World, the alphas needed the helicopters. But the deltas and the epsilons, they didn't need helicopters. They just needed drugs to keep them happy and a little bit of food. That's all they needed. So I think we're heading down the kind of Brave New World kind of road with this the globalist elite in the alpha layer, and then the rest of us all layered down. Now, so let's then get into these three areas, and there's three areas in the book, which is the economy. Now, and then we'll talk about as well energy, and then the big one, environment, when we will hopefully get to the books. Now, in the economy, we've already talked about digital currency, but it seems to be they actually want to reduce the world's population. So there's the alphas, and they don't even seem to want any gammas or epsilons. Do you think that's part of the plan, where they replace us, me and you, with robots and AI?
Simply put, yes. And there's a lot of potential for that we're seeing now in development. I personally think there's many, many problems with AI and general mechanization of lots of activities that actual human beings would want to perform, not so much the physical dimension of it, because we've all benefited from the industrial processes that meant, that human labor wasn't needed for X, Y, and Z. That's even though I would have to say that in the particularly, post-Second World War, the sort of the 50s boom in the US, all that optimism, we were told that probably by the 1980s, but certainly by the year 2000, that we would be, working 2 or 3 day weeks and spending the rest of the time reading poetry and drinking wine in the park.
I wish.
Day trips to the moon, domed cities, flying cars, all of that Jetson stuff. But it seems that the increase in industrialization has actually just led to more poverty, physically, emotionally, spiritually, dare I say, beyond the remit of your podcast. So, yes, that's definitely, I think, the agenda. Certainly, the difference between humans and machines, or humans and AI, is that we've sometimes got ideas of our own, that trying to stamp that out, and we have physical needs beyond purely just fuel, and that's one of the problems that he ran into in 1984, was that the worst crime of all, love. They just couldn't stamp out that irrational, emotional dimension of the human being, which actually is what makes us human. So the Brave New World model could apply in keeping people happy and placid, as their numbers are gradually reduced. So one thing I would say is that to a certain extent, these industrial civilizations, the advancements that we have, do depend on a certain level of population. Development of AI and other systems along these lines is crucial, because they can't, even if it's just really relatively benign population decline, new babies just not being born, as opposed to the dystopian idea of wiping people out with, either B words, virus, vaccine.
Don't say those words. The AI will catch those words.
So you can cut them out. So even if it's not just that gradual decline, a lot of it's contingent. You still need a certain number of people to do a certain number of things. So AI has to be developed up to a certain level where it's a bit like the automated checkouts in supermarkets. They're quite advanced pieces of kit, but they've always got to have an actual human standing on one side for when they go wrong. So I guess the model for the technocracy is to get those machines to a more and more advanced level, so they don't need human intervention. They can just kind of function as much as they like on their own. But I always wondered what the end game in all of that was. And again, this is, I think, beyond the remit of our conversation. But, so what are they just going to do? Are they just going to get to a certain point? The elites, the globalists get to a certain point in all of this and then just coast from there on? But then you get on to the transhumanist idea of like merging with machines and becoming more, and digital quantum immortality, all of that stuff. So that's just a thought about where some of these people might be thinking about what their future might be once we've been dealt with.
Yeah, we really do seem to be heading down the kind of the Matrix road. Also, as well, they seem to be going back to this idea of Jeremy Bentham's panopticon state. So they're always watching us with all this technology. And also, as well, they're going back to the ideas of the Malthus ideas, that there are limited finite resources. Now, I'm a big believer in the abiogenic theory of oil. Let's not go there too much. When I look at Titan and I see Titan is a world of methane, and we know methane comets hit the Earth. So there's all this methane here somewhere in the mantle or whatever. But let's not even go down the abiogenic oil road. Let's just say that we have 200 years of oil reserves. It's more than that. I think gas reserves are 500 years in Qatar, and even at current rates of consumption, even if we just have fossil fuel and it really was all made from little animals and it isn't abiogenic, there's still hundreds of years left. Surely by hundreds of years passing, if they take away this throttling of the economy and this panopticon state, surely by then we will get to, I know fusion's always 30 years away, surely we will get to fusion within 30, 40, 50 years. And then once you've got to fusion, once you've sorted out the problems with neutrons and beryllium and a few other things, small problems, once you've sorted out those problems, you've got fusion. And now you can make unlimited amounts of hydrogen from water, and you can have unlimited amounts of hydrogen fuel everywhere. So why are they so Malthusian, do you think? Why? The history of the last 200 years, 300 years has been ever expanding things, breaking the Thomas Malthus trap. Why are they so scared about everything coming in again?
Well, I've had a great many guests on my podcast who would echo positively the sentiments that you've just expressed. I've also had, a range across the board. Some who would be shaking their heads and waiting to disagree with what you just said. If people go to legalize-freedom.com, which is the website, and they go to the search box and they just type in
link in the show notes. Thank
you. And they just put in the search box, Great Reset. They'll come up with a wide range of thought and opinion on this. So, but let's just allow that we could develop, a truly global, sustainable, powerful, energy source that allowed us to continue much as we are. Improved, of course. We're talking here in material terms, not with all the sort of social, and economic and environmental problems we have, a lot of which are really self-created and didn't need to happen. There is a dimension to this, again, going back to what I said a moment ago about this transhumanist thing. There's a kind of an ideological dimension to these agendas that goes beyond what most people think of. That most people read about this subject, they may delve into it, look at the agendas, see where things are headed, and then they often hit brick walls, and they're confused. I don't understand this. Why would they do this? Why have they said that? What's the point of this? And in my research, a lot of it is suggested that there's something else going on that's just not being stated. And again, it's not something we have really the time or perhaps the remit to get into. But I do think there's more to this. You might even want to call it religious. I mean, if I invoke that word, it would maybe indicate to some people what we could be dealing with here. It isn't just a case of rational management of systems, planetary systems, and resources. It's more than even ideological, because we've seen all these different ways that people have had over the centuries, from communism to National Socialism being extreme in the 20th century, about how to organize societies. There's ideas beyond that, and we know from history when you get into this sort of you go beyond ideology into what we just call it, for the sake of argument, let's stick with religiosity. You then become detached from material reality, and I personally think there's way more to three-dimensional 5 sense reality out there, but that's not the point. That's the place that you and I and everyone watching and listening finds themselves in, and that's the situation we're managing in the here and now.
Yeah, that's a bit out there for me, that kind of thing. But more importantly than that, my glass is getting very empty. So I think that should just about do it for part one. We will move on to part two in the next podcast next week. We've talked about the economy. We're going to talk about energy, so we will get into a bit more of the stuff about energy. Now they're going to go to try to restrict our use of energy. We're also going to talk about power bills. Now they're astronomical at the moment, and why that might be the case. We're then going to get into the environment, and this is where we'll get to the bugs, and we'll get to the 15-minute cities, and we'll get to all those other things that might be something that you're interested in. And then we're going to talk about, to wrap up, we're going to talk about how we can fight back against this inexorable movement. Just as communism seemed inexorable, this WEF world seems inexorable, but maybe there is a way back. So we'll talk about how we can fight that as individuals, and how we can fight it as a big believers in liberty group, and push this thing back into the Pandora's box that it deserves to be placed in. So I'd just like to thank Greg for his time now, and we will see you next week to continue this discussion. Good night.